on this computer. Okay, cool. It's recording now. So the way that the talk is going to work is I'm going to go ahead and pull up our little list of things. Okay. First, how can you briefly introduce yourself and explain why it is that you wanted to run, what your qualifications are, pretty much what drives you to be doing this crazy thing, running for office.
Yes, of course. So my name is Lynette Brookins. Everybody calls me Starr. So I'm running for county court judge here in Hillsborough County. I was raised in a law enforcement and military family. So I've developed an unwavering and significant respect for the rule of law. And that's one of the things that really drives me to run for this seat. I've seen so many rogue judges and judges doing what they're not supposed to be doing, and staying within their confines. So that, along with several other things, have encouraged me to run for this office. So that has only, of course, deepened as I've gotten older. I've had an opportunity to serve as an anti-terrorism dispatch officer. So I was able to help those who dedicate their lives to protecting and serving our community. I think it's incredibly important that we preserve the integrity and legitimacy of our courts by ensuring that our judges exercise humility and restraint, while also ensuring that everyone's treated with fairness and respect, right? So I think that our judiciary and our legal system should be something where people know that they can come in front of and get a fair shake. Like, I don't care who your daddy is. I don't care who your mama is. I don't care how much money you make. The law is the law, and that's what our judges need to follow. So I'm an originalist. I'm a member of the Federalist Society, and I'm a firm believer in the law is what it is. It's not what I want it to be. It's not what I think it should be. So I think I'm the most qualified candidate to serve as your next judge due to my expertise on both sides of the aisle and with various types of law. I started off my career as in a prosecutorial role. So I prosecuted parents who had abandoned, abused, and neglected their children. It's actually through that position that I actually adopted my daughter. So she had spent most of her life in foster care. She is 28 now, and she was one of the children on my case, right? So I took her in and have helped raise her into hopefully someone that society and my God can be proud of as we move forward. So after that, I had an opportunity to work and get some appellate experience and do oral arguments before panels of judges from a criminal defense perspective. And I was there for about a year and a half, 2 years. And then I was actually observed during one of my oral arguments by a partner at a law firm. And ever since that day, I've been doing civil work. So insurance defense, personal injury, wrongful death claims, things like that. So I have the civil, I have the criminal, I have the dependency, which is kind of like a merge between criminal, family, and civil. So I have a lot of good experience on both sides that can help. And also, aside from being a tried and true trial attorney, so I've tried cases in front of judges, tried cases in front of jury, just had a jury trial last month. But I also serve as a hearing officer, which is a quasi judicial role. So I've actually had the opportunity to preside over cases and render decisions here in Hillsborough County. I also have a lifelong commitment to serving our community. And if you've had a chance to look at my website, you can see that I'm a servant leader. That's what I do. Usually I just remained in the back, but I'm a huge proponent of if not me, then who? So, I've been in the back a long time, but I feel like I need to take a step up and stand up for what's right. So I have that proven track record of excelling in the courtroom, inspiring in the classroom, because I'm also a teacher, and making a difference in our community. I'm really blessed to have received great endorsements from a lot of individuals and leaders. Extremely proud to have the support of our immediate former Chief Judge, Ron Figueroa, who's very active in the community, did um, a lot of support from our law enforcement officers. And that's particularly important to me as the daughter of law enforcement officers, right? So I'm just asking y'all to support the servant leader who's both for and from our community and who's interested in making sure that our judges do what they're supposed to do.
Very cool. Thank you for that. what I was going to do actually, as far as questions, is I was going to base it on a survey that actually there's a lady in the area who is a constitutional lawyer, as it turns out, named Chris Ann Hall. And she developed a survey for local candidates. And so we're going to focus our questioning based on a survey that she made, and then also a few questions that we generated as well as a group. So I guess the first question that we had is, do you have a campaign manager for your campaign?
So I was working with Chris Chambers. I'm not sure if you guys know him, but he's been going through some personal matters. So he had to step back, unfortunately. But as y'all know, if you've done your research, this isn't my first campaign. I ran in 2022 and I got extremely close, and I was the campaign manager and the consultant. So at this point, I feel like those resources that, potential constituents give to me would be best served by doing things like advertising and getting out there and sharing my message with the community as opposed to paying a consultant. So I don't have one anymore.
I like that answer. I was going to say that, but I'm going to try to maintain neutrality. Okay, sorry, just slip on my part. Okay, let's see. Have you lived in Hillsborough County for a long time, or what's kind of your history as far as like counties that you've lived in?
Yeah, so I'm a fourth generation Tampa native, and I say that although I'm a military brat, right? So I was actually born in Wiesbaden, Germany. We would come home like every year to Tampa, but we moved back home for good when I was in the eighth grade. Yeah, eighth grade. And I've been here ever since, except when I went to DC for law school. I also did, whenever I was doing the child welfare work, that was in Osceola County. So for 2 of those 3 years, I was in Osceola County, but I'm a daughter of Hillsborough County.
Very cool. Okay, next question here. Let's see, I think you probably covered a couple of those. Now this one, it always sounds a little bit weird whenever you say it, like you're kind of confronting somebody, so it's weird. But the question is, do you understand who you work for?
Of course.
Okay, who do you work
Can
for?
I expound upon that?
Yeah, go ahead and expound.
So as an elected official, you of course work for the constituents and the people within Hillsborough County. But I also think as a judge, your first role is that you work for the Constitution and the law itself. So I think that that's the most important part. But also just remaining open and remaining fair to your constituents that come before you. And if people have questions that we can ask, making sure that we still are out there and remain servant leaders, which is what I intend to do.
Cool. Do you hold any loyalty, bond, or affection toward any foreign country or territory?
Absolutely not.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Have you ever been discharged or asked to resign from a job?
Have I ever been? I'm sorry.
Have you ever been discharged or asked to resign from a job?
No.
Cool. Have you ever been convicted or pled guilty to a felony or crime?
No.
Okay. What guides your moral compass?
I think my moral compass is really embedded in my faith. So I would say that that drives a lot of it. I am aware, of all of the laws surrounding that, and that I can't, of course, base my decisions on my but who I am as a person is so deeply rooted in my faith. I was raised in a Baptist church. That's my upbringing. I was used to going multiple times a week. You just can't shake who you are, right? So that guides my moral compass.
Very cool. Where do our individual rights
The Constitution.
come? Okay, let's see. Okay, sorry, I'm taking a couple notes here on the way. Does the government have the authority to take away our individual rights?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Does the government have authority to take away our individual rights?
No, so I think the authority is vested within the Constitution. So the Constitution is what it is. So I don't believe that they have a right to take that away.
Mm. What if just to challenge a little bit on that one?
Okay.
What if our law was not the Constitution?
What if the law, like a statute, was not specifically embedded within the Constitution? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like what if we didn't have the Bill of Rights at all?
Then, and where would our rights come from? So our rights would come from the laws that the legislature enacts. And then it would be the judge's role to make sure that that's constitutional, even if it's not contained within. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that question in a way that actually makes sense. So it comes from the statutes and the text as it's enacted. That's where it comes from.
Okay.
And if I can just step in here, Lily, I don't know if you can get rid of those headphones or whatever, but the microphone's just really, it sounds like, you got it from the dollar store. But we can kind of understand you, but it's just not the best quality.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and switch. I'm going to enter into the Zoom with my phone as well. And then hopefully that will solve that issue. Hold on for just a second here. Okay, here we go. Thank you for bringing attention to that in your colorful way.
Sure.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, that's so much better.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, there we go. We're gonna go with that then. Although honestly, I still need to be able to hear you guys, so it's gonna be a little weird.
Okay, can you hear us okay?
Oh yeah, actually no, I can hear you on my phone, so it's fine. I'll do everything on my phone.
All right.
Okay. Okay, moving forward, what is the role of government?
I think the role of government is very limited. And that everybody needs to stay within their confines and within their lane. So the role of government is to effectuate the will of the people. And then that's done through, things like the legislature and them enacting laws and the society electing them into those positions. And if they're not doing what people want them to do with regard to enacting those laws, and then removing them from those positions. So I think it all comes back to the people.
Okay. What training have you had to properly understand the United States Constitution, looking specifically beyond law school?
So beyond law school, the training, I guess, would just be being out there and being an active practitioner, both from the litigator perspective as well as from the perspective as a hearing officer, where I get to preside over those cases and render those decisions. So that has really helped me hone in on things like that. But outside of that, I've always kind of been interested in the Constitution. I'm a bit of a law geek. I carry like a pocket one with me. So I think that I've just invested more time in getting deeper within the confines of that. And I've actually gone out and I've lectured to, students throughout our county, outside of our county, about our Constitution and what it means and the limited role that government should play. And, things like that, more civics, Constitution related issues.
Well, let's see. Now I'm going to list a few different documents and, I'll just pause in between them. But basically the question is, which of these have you read?
Okay.
The first one is the U.S. Constitution.
Yes.
The next one is the U.S. Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
The next one is the Florida Constitution.
Of course. Yes.
The next one is Common Sense by Thomas Paine.
I think I read that a long time ago. Yeah, that's on the list.
The next one is the Original Federalist Papers.
Yes,
Then the Original Anti-Federalist Papers.
yes.
The 1100 Charter of Liberties.
No, I don't think I've read that.
The Magna Carta.
The Magna Carta, yes.
The Petition of Rights of 1628.
Yes, a long time ago.
Grand Remonstrance. No,
I'm sorry.
might have mispronounced that, so you might have to interpret a little bit. The Grand Remonstrance.
That doesn't sound familiar.
The Bill of Rights of 1689.
I'm sorry.
The Bill of Rights of 1689.
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Next one is, in your opinion, what is the most important clause in the Declaration of Independence? Well, here, we'll do these one at a time.
Okay.
In your opinion, what is the most important clause in the Declaration of Independence?
What is the most important clause in, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The most important clause in the Declaration of Independence. I guess maybe one that's like important to you. We can kind of pull it up.
Honestly, I mean, so what sticks out most to me is, of course, in the preamble, which we all had to memorize, right? That all men are created equal. I mean, that sticks out most to me, especially in the legal system, because so many people enter that system and they don't feel like they're viewed equally, right? They feel like it's a pay to play system. So I know that's always resonated with me.
And the next one is, what is the most important clause for you in the U.S. Constitution?
That's a bit tougher. That is a bit tougher. No, just because you said the US, not Florida, right?
Although honestly, that's not a bad question for the Florida Constitution. If you have something you can pull forward, while I pull up the Constitution here.
I think it's actually the way that the US Constitution is set up, right? Where it has like the different branches of government and then goes by it and really delineates what the role of each one is. I think that's probably, so it's not really a clause, but it's more so the structure and the way that it's set up, if that makes sense.
The principle of the separation of powers.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. And then what is the most important clause in the Bill of Rights, specifically in the Constitution? In your opinion? Let's see, I can find a list of the different original Bill of Rights or whatever here.
To me, individually?
Yeah, I guess maybe what one do you think is like very important if you had to name one? You have the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the press, arms, no soldiers in private homes, no seizures.
Search and seizure, yeah.
Yeah, and then like warrants and stuff.
That's a tough one. I'd probably say I lean more towards being free from searches and seizures is of course incredibly important, right? For due process purposes and just being safe and secure in your own property. But I'm the daughter of the military. I'm a military man and a law enforcement official, so very young. I was raised on shooting, and I have a very close affinity with the right to bear arms, and being safe and secure in yourself in that right. And I think that's all I can say without getting in trouble.
Okay. So that gets through that one. It's a pretty difficult question.
And Lily, just so you know, you're kind of far away from the microphone when you're speaking. And now you have good quality, but it's hard to hear you.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Thank you. No. Okay, cool. Making sure everything's properly muted. Okay, good. Now this one says, many believe the U.S. Constitution is a living, breathing document. What is your view and why?
I don't believe it's a living, breathing document. I think it says what it says, and that we need to, or judges need to interpret it the way that it was interpreted, the way it was drafted, right? At the time that it was drafted. That's why I'm an originalist. And I've had a lot of in-depth conversations with people about this, because a lot of people try to use it as their cheat code to figure out where you stand. But I push back on them and I challenge them with this living, breathing document thing, because what that does is that inputs other people's biases, assumptions, whatever into that space. And it should not be about that at all. It should be about, I should be able to say, okay, this statute was written in 1825, and I should be able to look up what those words meant in 1825 and interpret that statute. That's the way that I think it should be. And I think it leads to better results for everyone, and it leads to certainty, and it takes away some of that discretion, which would lead to unfair results.
Next question is, what will be your primary duty and obligation to the U.S. and Florida constitutions and the people who hire you?
To follow the law.
Okay, let's see. Moving down. Would you prosecute anyone for exercising their rights during a state of emergency? Now, I might need to rephrase these somewhat, because I know that you're not allowed to make pledges exactly. But I guess so. I'll rephrase this then. Should people be prosecuted for exercising their rights during a state of emergency?
So my only hesitancy is whether or not I can actually answer this question, because it might be me giving a position on something that might come before a judge. But what I can say is that I can follow the law, and I can apply it equitably and fairly. And a lot of these laws are written such that they allow for things like extenuating circumstances and emergencies and exigent circumstances.
I guess a follow-up question to that might be, if somebody was being prosecuted, the Constitution gave them a right, like for instance, the right to bear arms, and they exercised their right to bear arms. And then they were prosecuted for exercising their right. What would be the responsibility of the judge in that case?
To uphold the Constitution.
Okay. Let's see. Name and describe 3 primary principles from the U.S. Constitution that will guide you as a representative.
So name and define 3 principles?
Name and describe.
Name and describe, okay. So 3 principles from the U.S. Constitution. I think we talked about earlier the structure of it and the separation of powers, and that would be, at the forefront of my mind, and ensuring that, I exercise restraint if I'm elected to serve as judge, and that I just uphold the rule of law and abide by the law and not let my own personal biases and everything come in. So, that would be a big one. And then I think the other ones just come in how we treat people, like fairness and justice are things that are articulated throughout the Constitution and for all, right? So the fairness and then the for all portions really appeal to me because I think it's really important to treat everyone like they're equal because we are, right? We all bleed red. We all we're all human. So it's just, I think that everybody should be treated with respect. And I think that everybody should be treated fairly. And, that's something that I actually learned a lot in my role as a hearing officer, because I thought people were going to hate me. Because sometimes, statutes are written the way that they're written. And as a judge or as a hearing officer, you're tied to that, right? You have to follow the law. That's what you have to do. And so when people would come before me, I would explain that to them and then let them know what the ordinance states and that this is what we have to do, because that's what's compelled by the law. But so many people came up to me after our hearings and they were just so thankful to the fact that I treated them like a human being. And on what was their worst day to a lot of them, because a lot of them were basically losing their jobs and livelihood because of the way that this ordinance was written. And that even though, it's such a huge day in their life, that they felt like it was important to me and they felt like I listened to them and I heard them. So I think that that's critical in a role such as a judge.
Okay, moving forward, what is your understanding of the term state sovereignty?
So my understanding of the term state sovereignty is the state having the ability to make the decisions that are best for its residents, and being able to do that without, unnecessary interference.
Oh, to find my space again because I clicked the button. Okay. Do these states have the authority to limit the federal government to its constitutional boundaries?
I'm sorry. Do these states have?
Okay, I have a catch-22 because whenever it's moving to me on the recording, it's just looking at the ceiling, but you can't hear me unless I hold it up to my face. Okay, it is what it is. Do the states have the authority to limit the federal government to its constitutional boundaries?
The states have the authority to so a state can't take away rights that are given to us in the US Constitution, right? So I mean, that's kind of similar to limiting it. I would consider that potentially being taken away some rights, depending on how it was limited. I know that states can expound upon or give more rights. And that's why a lot of times when you look at state constitutions, they're a lot more detailed than just the United States Constitution, right?
Do the counties have the authority to limit the state and federal governments to their constitutional boundaries?
So I think it would be the same answer. They have to abide with, they can't restrict and do anything that's already been put in place, especially with the Constitution. They'd have to do something like change the Constitution or get an amendment on it through putting it on the ballot and having people vote on it to see if they want to make a change. But it's the same answer as before.
Yeah, and I'll give an example too, actually.
Okay.
Suppose that the county gave a right that was maybe beyond what the state gave as a right. And then the state did something to contradict the right that the county put forward for an individual. Or suppose that the state gave an individual right and then the federal government did something that contradicted the right that the state had given that individual. Under that thought, that essentially the higher level of government is trying to take away a right that a lower government specifically gives to an individual. Do they have that authority?
So what that's kind of reminding me of is that is the supremacy clause, and kind of determining where federal, state, local lies within that. So if there's a contradiction, I know that especially with certain issues, what should be done, right, is that a case might potentially be, a case may arise, right? Like someone might say, hey, this person is trying to restrict my rights. And that's how a lot of these cases come up, and they go up to the United States Supreme Court, because people are saying they're restricting my rights, or they're limiting something that was given to me. I hope I'm answering that right. I have no idea if I'm answering that right, but I hope I am.
Yeah, in some ways, I think that I guess the question is like which level of government actually has the highest authority to protect the rights of individuals? Does it go from the top down or from the bottom up?
It goes from the top down. The federal has the final say. And that's the way that our courts are built too, right? Because you have like the county courts, then it goes up to circuit, then it goes up to appellate, and then it goes up to, potentially the Florida Supreme Court, then the United States Supreme Court. So I would follow that same trajectory.
So the lower courts appeal to the higher courts.
Yeah, like it would keep getting appealed up all the way up. And then the final say, so the last say would be, of course, when it goes up at the federal level.
The next question actually refers to the Supremacy Clause. It says, does the Supremacy Clause in Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution give the federal government and the Supreme Court the ultimate power to determine the constitutionality of any law passed by Congress?
Yeah. Unless, of course, the law changes or someone wants to give more rights, like a state or something wants to give more rights.
Okay, moving forward. Would you agree with a federal law that defines the general welfare clause based on the original intent of our founders?
Yes.
It says, next one, why does the Bill of Rights include the 9th and 10th Amendments? Explain each and why they are part of the U.S. Constitution. And I can pull these up to kind of jog memory if need be.
So I think those are the ones that say that, like, if you want to make any changes, you can do amendments, and like any rights not specifically listed, are still kind of open. I think those are 9th and 10th.
Yeah, it says states that rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution are retained by the people.
Yeah.
States that the federal government possesses only those powers delegated or enumerated to it through the Constitution.
Yeah.
And that all other powers are reserved to the states or to the people.
Yep.
So the question is, why does the Bill of Rights have that? And explain why it's important that it has that.
Because our country was built for and by the people, right? And at the end of the day, it should all rest on that. So I think it's a great reminder, honestly, to people of who's in charge, for lack of a better term. The people are in charge, and they get to determine, what they want to see with their country. And then I think it also helps with things that just aren't specifically listed, so that people can have some sort of indication where to go in the event that there is no conflict with the federal government. So they kind of know where to go to look for answers.
Next one was, what was the founders' original intent for the Second Amendment, and do you agree with them? 2A, of course, being the right to bear arms.
So I believe that their original intent was that individuals have the right to have firearms in whatever shape or form that they desire to protect themselves, to protect their families, to protect what this country was built upon, and that it should not be abridged, right? That it shouldn't be restricted. Of course, barring some things that we've, of course, seen in our laws, right? Like people getting background checks, people doing those sorts of things. But even with that, I mean, we've seen, especially, recently with the shootings that are going on, people are automatically going back to, oh, we need stricter requirements and all of these things. But we're seeing a lot of those shooters who don't have backgrounds, who this is the first thing that they've done, right? So it kind of calls all those things into question. But I believe that it should be unrestricted, and that it says what it says, right? We have the right to bear arms. The end.
Do you know the historical concern that the founders originally had that made them feel like this absolutely needed to be part of the Constitution?
Well, I know back then, and kind of similar to where the search and seizure came in as well, like the government, there was a fear that the government could just come in and take over, and just come in and search their belongings and their items so that they wouldn't have any sense of safety within themselves. So I think it came from that fear of government encroaching and extending beyond what they were supposed to do.
Next one is, in your opinion, what are the two current examples of the most egregious federal, state, or local overreach to constitutional powers, and what is your proposed remedy to each?
Can you say that one more time, please?
In your opinion, what are two current examples of the most egregious federal, state, or local overreach to constitutional powers, and what is your proposed remedy to each?
So of course, my proposed remedy as a judicial candidate, right, and as a judge would just be in making sure that the Constitution and the law is upheld, and that is of paramount importance, because we can't really do anything else, right? And I think there's been a lot of, so the term privacy, right? I'll just leave it there, into what it has exploded into.
As in, people don't have enough privacy, or because I think there's some context there that I might be missing because I'm not as embedded in that world.
Yeah, so just how people define privacy and kind of extending that scope beyond things that I think the founders or the framers imagined, and just all of these buzzwords, and culture wars and all of that stuff that has kind of erupted as a result of that. I think people are taking a term and they're taking it out of context. So I think it's really critical that judges come in and they rein in on that, and they just stick to what was originally meant by that term whenever it was implemented within that law, that constitution, whatever it is, right? Because I think that kind of goes back to that living, breathing constitution that we talked about earlier. It's just an excuse for people to implement their biases, their assumptions, and basically for judges to rule however they want, but that's not their role. Their role is very limited, and it's just to do what the law says.
Once again, I don't want to ask questions that I know I can't based on the kind of race that you have. We have maybe a suggestion here that somebody's sending to me on my private chat here.
Okay. Yeah, because I want to make sure I don't run afoul of the canons too. So I'm trying to answer it in a way.
Yeah, okay. Maybe we'll just keep on moving then, because I think that maybe I can research that a little bit more and understand what you were thinking.
Okay.
Okay, I think that more or less brings us to the quiz by Chris Ann Hall. And then I think there was a couple other questions. One of them is just kind of, I think, because you are embedded in your world, I think it might be an interesting one for you.
Okay.
One of our members, Jason here, just wanted to ask you, what is a woman?
Um, so of course I can't answer that question outright, right? Because that's something that might come before a court. But like I said, whenever a statute's enacted, you look at how you define that at the time. So whenever you look at the definition of woman back whenever it was enacted, that's the proper definition.
Okay, so it's based on whatever the legal definition is.
Whenever it was enacted. So not the living, breathing, not what's it at 8:13 on February 27, 2024 around the world. Not what it is to a certain faction of people, but what it meant whenever it was enacted.
Okay, so if there's a law that pertains to a man or a woman, and it was passed during a particular time when
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. I think it's
Okay.
I think it's freezing a little
Okay. Can you still hear me?
bit on my end. I apologize.
No worries.
Can you hear me? I think it's freezing on
Yeah, I can still hear you.
my end. Yeah, my internet connection is unstable.
Okay.
Am I back?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think you never left. Like it just wasn't coming in properly for you, I think.
Yeah, it's saying my internet connection is unstable. I think it's done. It's like you've been working since 7 a.m. I'm done. Leave me alone.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to paraphrase, I guess, just to make sure that I understood what you were saying about what a woman is. So then if there's a law that was passed that pertains to a man or to a woman, then what the definition of a man or a woman was at the time that that law was passed, that's the definition that the law defines as a woman in that particular case.
Right. So it should be defined by the definition at the time that it's written. That's what originalism stands for. So yes.
Okay. That makes sense as a principle. Okay. Now everybody has been listening in, and I asked at the beginning of the session, I'm not sure everybody was there to hear it, that if you have any questions that you come up with while we're having this interview, that you write them down. And now is the open forum where the members who are part of the chat can ask their question. Do you have any questions?
I don't think I have any questions. Is this the end of the survey? Like, so we're just doing Q&A and then that's it?
Yes, and I guess I did have one more question too that I remember I wanted to ask as well.
I have a question, Lillian.
Okay, go for it.
Hi, Starr. My name is Tim Driver. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well, Tim.
My question alluded to the federal powers and the state powers. One example that I can think of is, for example, marijuana federally is illegal, but some states have decided to make it legal. And, there's currently a lot of conversation in the state of Florida with regards to legalizing marijuana. What is your take on, number one, Florida legalizing marijuana? And then what is your take on it with regards to the state versus the federal legislation?
So our federal constitution, the US Constitution, is silent as to that issue, right? So that's why these states are able to kind of come in and institute things like this. And I know there's been talk in Florida about there potentially being on the ballot an amendment that would be added to the Constitution allowing something like that. And of course, you know, the role that I'm trying to be in would not be a part of that. So it would more so rest in the hands of the people, and they get to make that determination. And then if they make that determination and it's implemented and it comes before a judge, then it would be the role of the judge to make sure that the rule of law is just followed, right? And that I'm upholding the rule of law. So I know that doesn't specifically answer your question, because that is something that's kind of lingering out there, but I wanted to at least give you some insight as to how that process kind of works, and then the judge's very limited role in that after the fact.
Okay, thank you. My
You're
second
welcome.
question is with regards to something on the state, federal, or local level that may be perceived as being egregious. You know, one particular problem that we sometimes have, especially in the African American community, is dealing with impunity of officers that overstep their bounds with regards to arrests, but then there's no accountability for it, because because of impunity. How do you stand with regards to law enforcement impunity?
So that's a tough one, right? So there are laws in place to protect people from anyone overreaching or overstepping or doing more than they need to do or stepping outside of the lawful boundaries of their job. And that's something very serious. I know in our recent times, especially with things like social media, we see a lot more of it. So, you know, I'm of the opinion that a lot of the fallout behind some of those incidents should not, like, we shouldn't paint with a broad stroke, right? Not all law enforcement officers are bad. All bad apples don't ruin the entire bunch. So I think that it's incredibly important for, no matter who you are, that you're subject to the law and that you have to abide by the law. So I think that that's very, very important. And so I believe that answers your question, because if somebody steps outside the bounds of the law, then they need to be dealt with accordingly within the confines of the law. But I just don't think that we should also just paint a broad stroke and burn it all down, as the kids say. I think that, you know, we have things in place that can help with that. And I think it's more so people getting in front of it and doing what they need to do in order to make sure that they have a viable claim going forward, right? And whatever that might be, in filing a lawsuit or saying that their constitutional rights were violated. But I think that's something very, very serious, and something that people need to look at in a very detail-oriented way, in a very fact-specific way, and just making sure that it meets all of the requirements that's outlined and delineated within the law.
Yeah, I think in some
Thank you.
ways, I think in some ways maybe there's also a legislative issue there too as well, where the specific immunity that some public officials and healthcare workers and law enforcement officers have when they do actually step outside the bounds that immunity that they have is given to them by law. And so in some ways it has to be legislative, the solution to that problem.
Yeah, I agree.
I have a question. So, in the context of the recent pandemic, there were lawsuits involving mask mandates, social distancing. Let's take now some things have been clearly addressed by the legislature, but I don't think mask mandates so much. So let's say that a county commission implemented a mandate to wear masks indoors or what have you. Um, what would guide you on a decision in that case? Like, what would you be looking at? Because some of these cases, it turned into one doctor versus another doctor before a judge, and I don't know what the judge was basing his decision on.
Yep, and that's a huge problem, right? So of course we need to be looking at the law and what people are entitled to do. So what our local elected officials are entitled to do, and whether or not that's within the bounds of the law first, and whether or not that's constitutional second, right? So those are two different questions. So of course I'd look at the text and make my decision from there. I mean, I don't remember anything about masks being included in the Constitution, Florida or United States. So that would be kind of where I would lean, but I would look to that information.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, do we have other questions on the floor? Okay, I had another question actually. And this is kind of a question just for I guess like general campaign strategy sort of, which is not necessarily something that is like strategy that you should be concerned about somebody else figuring out about. But one of the things I do whenever I'm looking at a campaign is I will look at the treasury reports for the campaign. And it's kind of like a question of viability and everything for a candidate. And so I have noticed on here that there is a bit of a gap between your candidate and you about the fundraising. And I was just wondering, what's your strategy to address that?
Yeah, so I of course got into the campaign after my opponent. Last time we raised enough money to run a viable campaign, to get advertisements and everything out there. I anticipate that being the same this time. We've not had any events either. So I think, a lot of that kind of lends to that. But I know that if you look at community support, and if you look at the number of donors, contributors versus the number of donors, contributors of my opponent, mine are going to be equal or more than that. And I know our next report isn't due until about a month. But, I think that you're going to see that whenever that report's released, that groundswelling of community support. I tell everyone, I'm just a regular person. I can't donate that much money to my own campaign like my opponent can. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here because I know that I'm the best person for this seat. And I know that the community sees it and the endorsements that I've received and the support that I've received. So I would just say money isn't everything. Money doesn't win campaigns. We will certainly have enough money to be a viable campaign and to be able to spread our message. So I think that's what matters most.
Cool. Yeah, it's a bit of an awkward question, but I felt like I had to ask it because it's a liability question,
It is. I understand. Yeah, because in every endorsement interview, they ask about that, right? So they asked about that to me last time in a lot of the endorsement interviews. And I think what they've seen, especially, and that was a tough time period too, right? So it was like right around the holidays. So people aren't really trying to give that much. But we've seen it kind of starting to ramp up more this month, and we expect that to continue throughout March and throughout the campaign. So we want to make sure that all of our ducks are in a row. And with judicial campaigns, it's a little more limiting because I can't specifically ask people. So I have a committee of people who are asking on my behalf. And I know that kind of takes away some of it, because I know after my last campaign, people are like, why didn't you just ask me? I'm right here. Like, well, I'm not allowed to, right? So that just complicates it a little bit more, but we'll get there.
So this
Yeah.
is Tim again. I have another question.
Yeah.
I believe that our governor is tough on crime and has actually, removed judges and attorneys that he has found that, are not necessarily tough on crime. So what is your stance with relative to being tough on crime, and how do you plan on managing that perception?
So I think the most important thing to remember in that regard is that in my role, I would be just limited to following the law, and the law is what the law is. So, that's kind of where it stands at that point. But I think that people can look at the fact that I started off my career in a prosecutorial role. And that, I was very aggressive in that. So all of course, that information is available. People can go and talk to individuals that I worked with in that capacity. And I think that role would help me a lot in this role, because when you're in that prosecutorial role, you're getting, and how it worked for us were the child protective investigators would come into our office and they'd have the evidence, they'd have the information, they'd have pictures, and they'd ask, do I have enough evidence to remove this child from their parents, to take this child away from their parents? And I took that very, very seriously. So I would go through it all with a fine-tooth comb. We want to make sure that our children aren't being harmed, but we also don't want to unnecessarily interfere if they're not, right? So, and that's something very similar to what a judge would do in that role. They look at the facts. They don't just gloss over it and get caught up in the emotion, because that's a highly emotional position where you're talking about removing children. And I was very, I was very tough. And there were people who didn't want to come to me because they know that I'm going to follow the law and that you need to come correct. Like, if you want me to do something like that, if you want us to take a child away from their parent, you need to make sure that we're following the law and that it all checks out. We're not just going based off of emotion here. So I know a lot of people didn't appreciate that, and, worked really very closely with our law enforcement partners and making sure that those cases were handled effectively and handled well. But I think what also speaks to it, so, you'll see from that sort of experience that I was very tough in that regard. But I think I was also very fair. I even had parents who, would come up to me after court and just thank me for not treating them like a monster, despite what the allegations were against them. So I think that you can be a stickler for the rule of law, but also show respect and fairness and kindness to everyone that comes before you. And that's what I've done so far, and that's what hopefully I'll continue to do on the bench.
Yeah, for context, actually, once again, for that question, I believe that DeSantis removed the officials because they were refusing to rule based on what the laws were.
Yeah.
So that's the context, I believe.
Thank you, Lillian. And thank you for that answer, Starr.
You're welcome.
Yeah, also because I was mean asking about the funds, I will make a note also for anybody who's watching this recording later that Christmas time is a very difficult time to fundraise, and that's when the report went through. So we're waiting for another one to come through that's after the holidays, and that would be more reflective of the viability of the campaign.
Thank you.
Okay, well, do we have any other questions?
I don't think so.
Okay, then we have reached the point where we are going to thank you for coming very much for allowing us to interview you, Starr. And if you have any closing comments, now is a good time as well. And then we'll wish you goodbye. And then we'll probably stay on the call for a little bit and discuss whether to endorse you or not, and then let you know soon what our decision. Hopefully we can make that decision tonight, and if not, soon.
Okay, perfect. Well, I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity. As you can tell, the rule of law is something extremely important to me. It's something that's been ingrained in me, as well as just my commitment to serving the community. So I'm really interested and excited about this potential opportunity to kind of bring people back to what a judge's role should be, and getting out there and educating the community about that as well. So if you have any other questions for me, feel free to reach out to me. Everything is Vote Brookins for Judge. So my LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, website, it's all Vote Brookins for Judge. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. But thank you so much for this opportunity that you've given to us to get to know a little bit more about me.
And
Thank
thank
you,
you so
Starr.
much for coming. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and log out.
Take care.